And I'll light our chalice.
We'll just ask everybody to mute themselves, please, except Gregory.
And Deborah has our reading.
And Deborah.
This is a poem called Earthworm, written by Dabney Dixon, who happens to be my sister. Earthworm. The world is quiet in the midnight rain. No birdsong breaks the stillness. Not even the frog is heard, as the raindrops splash on the leaves. But you are here in the darkness, in the silence, in the waiting. The earthworm tunnels quietly, preparing the soil for the dawn. You're muted, Mary.
I got it. Thanks to you and to your sister Dabney. And with that, we want to thank Gregory North for coming to join us this morning. And Gregory, we'll turn the mic, as it were, over to you. And we're very curious to hear what you might like to share with us this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Mary and Deborah. And it's wonderful to be back at Elder Tree and to see so many of our friends here. And to do so on really an important pivoting point in our journey together as a community of faith. The moment when we're beginning to, all of us, reemerge from the last several years of the pandemic and enter into what we're starting to see as the new normal. I don't know about you, but in my life with family and friends and at work, I would say it's not exactly like it was before. It really is different. And we're still in the really in the phase of trying to understand how this is going to work. And I think it's just as true in our church community as it is in the broader community of which we're all a part. And I'd like to talk today about three things. One, a sense of what's the situation that we find ourselves in right now? What's the information that we have and we gather as a church, as a board, to understand how we're doing? Two, put that in the context of what's going on in the wider world. And three, talk about looking ahead and what we all have to be doing together in order for us to continue to be a remarkably successful and important community in Greater Rochester. There's a fourth thing, though, that's really important for me to do. It would be remiss if me, as congregational president, I didn't spend a significant portion of this session actually listening to you. Not only answering any questions you might have, and I'll do the best of my ability, but also just asking you some questions, because ultimately a big part of what we're responsible for doing as board members is to be open to and constantly engage with the congregation to understand and reflect what you're looking for and what you need now and in the future. So let's start with a few data points that can help us understand where we are today. How does the board do that? Well, we do it a couple different ways. Obviously, we have information that comes to us from our minister, our executive who runs the operations of the church, with a report that we get on a monthly basis on how things are going from her point of view. We also have a treasurer, currently Robert Lemorski, who provides information working in cooperation with the minister, and Florence Jessup, who is responsible for our operations. On the financial health of the church, as well as information we get from our investment committee to report periodically on our endowment. This is information that flows in on the operations and the finances of the church. We also have the responsibility to, as I said a moment ago, continuously listen to you and the rest of the members of our faith community. And we have an annual survey process. And I see John Horn is in our room virtual today. And he's on the linkage committee, which is one of the committees of our board. And they do great work to design, execute, and analyze an annual survey that's designed to be a strong way of getting voice of congregation into our deliberations as a board. We also have a series of other things we do over the course of the year. Recently, and every year we do this at least a couple times, we do a policy governance and governance forum where we have an opportunity to share how we operate as a board and also get feedback from others or questions during that session. And I'm happy to say Lynn Kinsman did a wonderful job doing that recently to help share the way we operate, because it's really important that we have an open and transparent process as a board. So all these listening instruments are designed to get information from the congregation. And although we're still, I think it's fair to say, interpreting all the results from our most recent survey numbers that I have a few numbers I would love to share with you. The first one, and kind of most important, really anchor, is 91% of people who responded to our survey strongly agree that they understand our ends. And this is really important because if all that work we did during our Road Ahead, raise your hand if you remember our Road Ahead, it's a few years back now, but we had a chance back when we were all getting together in a room together and being able to sort of work on what is most important for us now and in the future. We wrote down and then agreed as a congregation on this is where we're going. This is what we want to do. These things are important to us. So the fact that 91% of our people feel like they understand what those are is really important because it's hard to measure success if you don't know what your goals are. The second number I want to share with you is the fact that it's one thing to have goals, it's another thing to do something about it. So 86% of folks who responded to our survey indicated that they are actively engaged and they feel strongly that we as a church partner with organizations to address racial, social, environmental, and economic injustice. Ultimately, they see us as a doing church, and that's a very important part of your legacy, what you all have been doing for decades, and what we continue to do within our community now and in the future. Another number I'd like to share is the concept of welcoming and inclusivity. This is a prequel to something I'm going to be talking about in just a few moments, but it's important that folks feel welcome here, that they feel like we're a community that they can see themselves reflected in and be part of. And 88% agreed or strongly agreed that people see themselves reflected in the congregation, they feel welcomed here, they feel inclusive, and that's really wonderful because obviously, as you may know, in this past year, we were able to renew our status as a welcoming congregation, and whether it's from an LGBTQ plus point of view, it's from a ability to care for young people and older people alike, an ability to welcome people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. That's a very important part of our values at First Unitarian, and it's reflected in this sense that people think that we are providing that sense of openness and inclusivity in the invitation that we give every week in our worship services and also throughout the week when we talk to others. If we then think about the last question, which is, okay, but what about me? Am I living? It's nice to know the church is taking action according to our ends, but how am I doing? 83% of our congregants responded that they either agree or strongly agree that they are living their lives. You, congregants, are living your lives consistent with the values that are important to you and that we share as a community. I personally think those numbers are wonderful in terms of reflecting the positive energy that really emanates and radiates from what we hold together as common values here at First Unitarian. It's the glue. But we also know that that glue is made up not just of values that we share, but relationships that we build. Raise your hand, please, if you're able to indicate if you have some of your closest friends that you've grown over the years here at First Unitarian. Oh, look, everybody raised their hand, okay? That's a really good thing. We know that, I have in my work that I do around the world with organizations, both large for-profit companies and smaller and mid-sized nonprofit organizations, relationships matter. It's the relationships that often bring us back again and again, and it's relationships that hold us close. And ultimately, one of the things that I think it's fair to say during the course of the pandemic is never has the value of First Unitarian been more obvious to each and every one of us. We see this again and again in things we've heard at Digital Coffee Hour, in other conversations we've had, where people felt like the fact that we all were out there for each other during this pandemic was absolutely critical. That our relationships that we've built up over the years came home to benefit us because we could do things like Elder Tree and get back together and be part of that welcoming and supportive community. We also know that many people who were in situations where they were shut in during lockdowns or just generally became a little more disconnected from other family members during this were benefiting from things like people bringing over food and being there for them. So we saw an upswing over the last several years of congregants actively engaged in pastoral work in addition to the great pastoral work our staff does. And so, I want to give a shout out to people, not only Anne Perry, but others who are there as part of this caring connection behind the scenes that make sure that if someone's not feeling well this week, if someone's having a challenge, came out of the hospital or others, we know that our community is there for them. Let me try this again, because part of what I'm doing here is interactive. Raise your hand if you feel like someone actually reached out to you and helped you get through this last couple of years of the pandemic, who's part of our faith community. Anybody? Yeah, just about everybody did. So this anecdotal data of the voting that we're seeing here in the room is reflected in what we as a board are hearing about how we've done taking care of each other during this time, which is a very important part of our mission as a community. Counting on those relationships I talked about a moment ago to benefit us. Now let's rotate a bit to, over the last 2 years, the truly remarkable job that our staff has done as we really rotated from what was the launch with great euphoria of Reverend Sherry getting here to the, oh my goodness, now we have to actually shut down and go into a different mode of operations. I think we've said this over the last couple of years. I'll say it again. I could not be more pleased, and the board could not be more impressed with the way not only Reverend Sherry, but the entire staff has really worked together to make sure that this pivot has been done with great acumen, with great ingenuity, and with, frankly, the humility to say it's not always going to work. I can still remember the first time we had a service where we tried to do outside under the tent last year, and we were having many of us still online, and people starting to type in the chat, hey, I can't hear this, turn that down, turn that up. It was the first time I saw kind of real live commentary. Just imagine if we were all in the pews together, in the chairs together at church, and everyone shouted at the minister, hey, I can't hear you. You know, it's like, but digitally, somehow that was kind of okay. I'm not sure. But the point is, we've all kind of made it through this together. And I personally applaud, and I hope you do too, the way our minister and her team continued to try to things differently until we found a formula that worked. And we really do appreciate the fact that so many of you stayed with us during this period, because it's easy for us to say, hey, this doesn't work for me, and therefore I'm going to opt out. And the fact that all of you are here today and have been part of the Elder Tree family over the last couple of years. How long, by the way, has Elder Tree now been in place? Is it 2 years, 3 years? How long have we been doing it? Anybody? Do you know?
2+ years.
I think it's about 2+ years, right? So this has been something that grew through this pandemic period. And so I think it's one of those legacies that we're going to take with us into the future that says, okay, in the new normal, how we operate, will this continue to be part of what we do? But I also want to caution us from having too rosy a picture as we paint through this reemergence from the pandemic, because this may have been better for some of us. I mean, this kind of deepening of relationships through digital engagement, things like digital coffee hour, Elder Tree, et cetera, but it didn't actually work for many. And if we zoom out and look at the big picture nationwide, it's true over the last 20 years, it's been truer in the last 10 years, and it's been very true in the last 2 years. There has been a steady decline in church membership across denominations throughout the United States and through much of the Western world. This is a statistic of which probably many of you are aware. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is the pandemic has been a forcing function to accelerate that trend. You may not know about this, but not only in our denomination, but across denominations in the US, many churches have had to close in the last 2 years. A lot of them didn't make it through the pandemic. We certainly have, but we've not been immune to these trends, and we've not been immune to the real challenges of going forward. What do we do to reconnect with those who may not have been served by digital church and who may have fallen out of the pattern of making Sundays at worship part of their lives, or fallen out of the pattern of going to Soul Matters groups, or falling out of the pattern of other things that we do in the community when we roll up our shirt sleeves and work together for racial, environmental, and social justice. And we know this because if we look at the number of folks who started coming back into the church when we reopened, it's a little bit down from where we'd expect in terms of membership at presence at our worship service. We know it because in our most recent stewardship data, which we'll share more later, I'm going to stay away from most of the numbers for the purpose of this, to not get ahead of our reporting process from the board and from the minister, but we're seeing a reduction in the number of pledge units, which is really part of a trend that goes back to 2017, 2018, but it's continuing to go, and we're seeing it again, and perhaps this, again, forcing function of the pandemic has resulted in another significant, if you will, step where we have to say, hey, are there as many of us here and working together to keep this church thriving as there were 5 years ago, 10 years ago? And the answer is actually no. And the flip side and the positive that I want to share with you as we look at that demographic trend is that the commitment and the engagement I talked about earlier is going nowhere but up. I'm happy to report that at every single age demographic group that we have in our congregation, we are seeing very significant growth in generosity, which is one measure of engagement, and that's at every level. People in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, beyond, are being more and more willing to dig deep and stay with us. Over the last 10 years, that's gone up significantly, and even in the last 3 years, it's gone up significantly. As a result, we've been able to maintain a budget which is largely flat from where it was back in 2017, 2018. But for those of us who have been in business or have run organizations where we think about these long-term trends, there's something wrong with this picture. If you plot the points on a line, you would say, we're expecting more of us to do more, fewer of us to do more over time. And that's not a strategy for long-term success. We also know that the demographics of our church are that there are actually fewer members who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s as a percentage of the total than there were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Think back to when you first joined First Unitarian. My guess is that a lot of you were in your 20s, 30s, 40s perhaps, and many of your friends were too. And that group of baby boomers, of which I am one, has aged through the course of the last 30, 40 years. And we're here together at Elder Tree today. The question is, where are the millennials, Gen X and Gen Z folks who were us back then? Are they with us here now? And that represents, I would say, the single most important challenge that I would like to bring forward to you this morning, which is we know that we have a community that serves each other very well. We know we have a community in which we've built very deep, loving, and spiritually engaging relationships. We know that we are doing good work in our community and in the world at large. We know that we are very engaged with our larger denominational friends across the US and the world. I'm happy to say that Barbara DeLeo and others who represent this church have done a remarkable job of connecting us with the broader denomination and helping our church stay on the edge, like we did last year when we voted to adopt the 8th principle as something that's important to us as a congregation. This is all really good. But the question is, are we sharing this good news with others? And are we growing through our mission field of Monroe County, Rochester as a city, out to Batavia, down into the Finger Lakes, over there to Syracuse? Are we thinking about a bigger, if you will, opportunity for us? And are we tapping people on the shoulder and sharing the good news of the work that we do at First Unitarian? Now, maybe it's because I spent a significant portion of my childhood and youth as a Southern Baptist. Maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way. But the way we did it when I was a kid in an evangelical church was we said the news that we have about our church was so important, it meant so much to us, that we just burst with excitement, couldn't help ourselves, that we wanted to tell others about it. We wanted to share that good news in a way that brought folks the message of what we're doing and why it's important to them, and that they would come and be part of that larger community. And I think if we hearken back to the days when First Unitarian was in a higher growth mode than it is today, we probably did a lot of that back then. We brought our friends along with us. Now, I'm guessing that many of you were invited by other members of this friend group to join First Unitarian. That's how you heard about it. But here's a challenge for us. As we begin to be an older congregation, how are we making sure that we are inviting folks who are a lot younger than us to participate in the journey along with us? And how do we get that message out in our community? Which means we have to be creative about how to invest in doing that and what types of events we can have, what kind of marketing we do. In a sense, how do we help more people know about us and learn about what we can do? And how do we listen to them in a way that maybe helps us inform things that they need that we don't know about as we start to serve the community that isn't as much like us, maybe, a community that maybe is less white, a community that's less straight, a community that's less old. These are people that we need to listen to and understand their needs for us to be successful. So what I've tried to talk about so far, hopefully in a way that is data-based and relatively compelling, is we've had a great run. We're doing great work. People are engaged. We've managed to hang together as a community during the pandemic. But as we emerge, we're emerging into a new reality. And that reality is one where many people have been overwhelmed by the complexity and challenges of our current society, overwhelmed by the challenges of the pandemic, and are maybe feeling a little alienated and disconnected. And young people, more than ever, are not going to church. And as a result, it puts strains on organizations just like ours. A couple of years ago, we began to have this idea that it was important for us to not just build for today, but to build for our future. We did a first round of this last year where we had investments that we made, as you know, in our building, which is the foundation of where we come together, and also in our community through RAIN. We're looking forward to, in the next year, launching the next phase and really thinking about how we invest in the future of our congregation to address some of these longer term strategic challenges and do it in a way that is not just making sure that we continue to be served, but to make sure that all of those that come later, who come after, who come next, who don't know about us, who need to know about us, who we hope come to join us, can become part of this community and put an oar in the water and pull together to improve the lot not only of individuals like us in Greater Rochester, but people who aren't like us. As we look around the room, people who are part of demographics that aren't represented here, but need to be part of our future as a faith community. We know that Unitarian Universalism is more needed today than ever before. Think back over the last 30 years. Have you ever known a time where democracy isn't more at risk than it is today? Have you ever known a time when there's more need for a reinforcement of the importance of economic justice based upon what we see in income inequality today? Have you ever seen a time where people are feeling more, in some ways, alienated and spiritually bereft based upon what looks like a world that's out of control than it is today? To me, this is a screaming call for Unitarian Universalism and what we have to offer. And our job is to help that call is answered. I have the opportunity over the course of this first, call it 20 minutes or so, to share with you some of my thoughts about where we are. There's a lot more specifics that we will share in things like our coming annual meeting, but I hope this has been helpful in terms of providing you with specific data points and also with some ideas about strategically where we are as an organization. Last thing I'd like to say is a word of appreciation for our minister and our board about how they've done as a job stewarding the work of this congregation over the last several years. We are coming out of the pandemic economically stronger than we were when we went into it. Our operating cash reserves and endowment are significantly up, both from where they were in 2017. Our minister and her staff have managed our expenses with great prudence to be careful about what we're doing. And we continue to tailor what we do to match the challenges of the economic realities that we all face as individuals and the challenges I talked about earlier in terms of membership and stewardship. So I just want to leave you with a note of pride in what our congregation continues to do in the community, appreciation for what all of you continue to do to support each other and us as a church, and also pride and appreciation for our staff and our board for the work that we're doing to ensure that there's a firm foundation for us to go on now and into the future. Thank you for your time this afternoon and this morning, and I look forward to answering any questions you have.
Thank you, Gregory. We've all been looking forward to hearing from you, and I think there are some questions amongst us, and the way that we have typically done it is ask people to raise their hands, and we'll go in turn. And it looks like Tom and Ann Perry have quickly raised theirs. Ann, Tom?
Yeah, so I was reminded recently that when Tom would run a 24-hour race, he would crash afterward. And I had to be prepared for that. And as we talked about this recently, Tom was able to find some research online about what happens in organizations after a crisis. It's a time when there can be a deep depression. People can be unhappy in their jobs. People can leave the organization. So I think it's a time when we have to be very aware of our white supremacy paternalistic culture vis-a-vis our employees. We need to stop expecting perfectionism. We need to be less defensive. Anyway, I'd like, Gregory, if you have some comments about your thinking along those lines.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Anne. You know, one of the things that, I'll just make this very personal for a moment. I'm a white male. I'm in my 60s. Our minister is a woman and a person of color who's considerably younger. We work very closely in partnership together. I have to be keenly aware of the power dynamics of that relationship every time we sit down and have a cup of coffee or we Zoom together. And that's something that requires me to step back and say, how do I manage that interaction in such a way that this person feels listened to, empowered, has the room to run, to realize her vision and potential? And how do I make sure that I'm representing with integrity what I understand to be the voice of the congregation? It's not easy. It's actually very hard. And I catch myself frequently. It just happened the other day in a conversation with Reverend Sherry, in which I said, okay, I'm not sure I want to answer the question you just asked me. Let's step back and think about this for a minute. What do you think the answer is? I think that every one of us, to Anne's point, has a responsibility, not just with our minister, but others who are part of our staff, and ultimately with new members of our congregation who stop by as visitors and hopefully become members, to handle those interactions with respect and with all we've learned through the racial sensitivity training that we've had the opportunity to partake of here at First Unitarian. Just understand that these dynamics are not easy, and that we're going to make some mistakes along the way. And I think humility is the watchword there. And you're good at making sure I didn't miss anything. Did I miss anything? Was that good? Okay, cool. I think it's Jack and Sandy and then Betsy. Jack and Sandy, you're on mute.
Let me start with a question and then I'll make some comments. What's Sunday attendance like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually said this in my talk that we've gone from a time when we had a couple of services and we had, more than, maybe 150 people who would show up for each service, to having one service where maybe 129 or 140 of you are online and maybe more like 70 to 80 are in the service at the church. I personally think that from a safety standpoint, I'm comfortable being back in the worship service in person, and I miss seeing people, so I'm there frequently, not every week because I travel a lot. But I would like to see those numbers in the congregation there together, get back to the 150, 200 numbers. Jack, does that answer your question?
Yes. An observation: when most of us came to Rochester, it was job related, and the economics of Rochester was on an upswing. And so some of the situation is different now. And that's, don't know how that factors in. A comment, I cannot imagine what our situation would be if we had not had Elder Tree. And I simply cannot imagine it. And I prefer not to, because I don't think it would be good. And our thanks to the folks who thought this up. And we've have great admiration for our minister, period. She's done an awesome job, even when she nags the two of us for some things. And again, we're so lucky to have her. I think most of us thought, oh my goodness, she's just starting her ministry with us and we have to shut down. And the trial has been a gift in a way.
Jack, I could not agree with you more. I hope I said that very clearly. I am every day amazed by Reverend Sherry, every day. And it's not just her, the whole staff. And of course, we're going to see Tommy leave shortly, and hopefully we'll be able to replace, we will never replace Tommy, right? Tommy is irreplaceable. We'll see what comes next, and hopefully it'll be the kind of gift that Tommy has been giving us for so many years in a different package. I think that the thing I want to make sure I honor, Jack, in your point, though, is that, yeah, I mean, I came to work for a company called Xerox in 2011. I got here and went, uh-oh, what just happened? But, you know, I also have friends who worked at Kodak for 30 years. And it's not the same economic space it was in the 70s, 80s. Everybody agree with that? It's different. However, I'll have to say that there are second tier, they call them cities. You know, this is not the New York, Chicago. This is more like the Rochester, Syracuse. There are cities like ours around the country that are doing much less well than Rochester. I mean, if you follow the numbers, Rochester has been remarkably resilient. And I'm so proud of what our community and our county has done to sort of continue to provide innovation. And I, as an entrepreneur, as a small business owner, I'm one of those people that started off in a big company here in Rochester, and I managed to find a way to transition into a smaller company. And I think I just continue to be amazed at Rochester's resilience. I just have to say that. Betsy?
Hi, Gregory, thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. This has been really interesting, and I appreciate it. I have a question regarding what mechanisms do we, the church, use to engage with other churches to determine best practices, seeking advice, sharing information, etc. I'm sure a fair amount of that happens through the UUA, but I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or observations about how do we make that work the best to our advantage as well as other churches, of course.
That's a great question. So there's a variety of different ways. You mentioned the UA, and obviously Barbara and others bring us a sense of what's happening in the greater denomination, and that becomes an input to us. We also have a minister who, I don't know if you know this, but Reverend Sherry is extremely well engaged broadly and well respected, by the way, considering her youth in our denomination. And we as a board support her taking time to go to activities with other ministers, learn and benchmark what they're doing. I also, and the board members, are part of a email group, a focus group that comes in through Gmail, where we can look at board presidents and board officers and talk about what's happening in churches across the country, across the state. We also have the ability, and by the way, Betsy, to your specific question, there's a constant running thread of, here's what I do, what do you do? Kind of sharing that happens in that thread. We also have really good regional support staff. I've had reason as board president to reach out to the regional folks and say, hey, here's something that's going on. I need your help with this. Can you tell me how this works? Can you show me the path that works for other denominations? And can you be there with us during, difficult situations? I have nothing but praise for the regional support, Betsy, we get from the denomination. The last thing I'd like to point out is that there's actually interdenominational support that happens too. Recently, I acted as an advisor to, I would say that informally, another church that was going through some difficult times. They were benchmarking how churches are governed. And I participated in an interview with them to help them understand how we do what we do and share our best practices. And they're going to do the same thing with us. So there's a variety of different ways that we benchmark and share best practices, because none of us are as smart as all of us. Betsy, did I answer your question? And do you have any suggestions for us to try something else?
Thank you. You did answer my question. I have a cousin who's president of a denomination of a church, much smaller, very much smaller church than ours. And so, we occasionally chat, and I'm just curious how that all works. And if I could just make one other comment unrelated to what I just asked. I just want to say I've been very impressed with how the staff has, and the board and everybody that's been involved has has managed the communication and the ongoing services through the last 2 years. Clearly it's been a difficult time for everybody in so many ways, but it's really very impressive that the services have continued, that the Zoom services online have continued. For me, the pandemic is not over. I feel very much it's still with us. Monroe County is still considered high risk, at least it was last week. So while it's certainly different than a year ago or 2 years ago, this sort of communication and services online are still very important, and I'm really appreciative that that's continued. So
thank you so much, Betsy. I think it's Barbara, then Howard, then David.
Thank you, Gregory. I just want to say that, first of all, this was an outstanding presentation, and I know there are many, not a few, but many former presidents in the room, and I'm sure they would agree that this is very informational for those types of us who are interested in the data and so on and so forth. So thank you for coming to Elder Tree and providing us an opportunity to have a little more informal conversation. There will be conversation probably at the annual meeting, but this is a little more intimate group, and how much I really appreciate your presentation. I have a question that reflects on 3 particular areas. I am interested in what are the considerations the Board of Trustees are using to look at adjusting the staff workload, because I'm sure many people know at some place in their brain, but maybe not in the front part of their brain, that our staff did all the things they were doing in 2019, and then they added technology and Zoom and 50,000 other things that were related to the mechanical part of delivering all the things that they did that in 2019, but were able to do physically in the building in a group and blah, 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 blah. So I'm interested in the considerations the board is thinking about as they talk about those things. The second part has to do with I'm assuming there are lower pledged units, and I'd like to have some broad sense of what the board is thinking about as they think about having fewer pledge units, which of course impacts our budget. And the third part is, what can we do as individuals as we migrate back or not to help move the process forward going into the next church year? Let me
handle your last question first, then your second question, and it'll answer the question for your third one. Okay. So, and I want to be respectful of the fact that you need 10 minutes at the end of this meeting to talk, Mary. I heard that, so I'll try to make my answers brief. So number one, everyone who's on this call should find somebody who's 20 years younger than you and invite them to church. That's my first thing. Okay. Boom. And if you can find a person who's a person of color, you get extra points for that one. Okay. Then my second suggestion would be for us to think about, and this relates to what we're doing as a board related to the number of pledge units, is you'll notice, Barbara, that I spent a significant part of my opening remarks talking about growth. That's not something you've heard a board president talk about in the last several years, but I'm talking about it, okay? And I think it's important that we be open and honest with each other, that we are in a community, as Jack was pointing out, that is actually in some ways not economically advantaged the way it was 20 years ago. We're also seeing a trend nationwide that says less people are going to church. So we are swimming proverbially upstream here. And so we actually have to redouble our efforts. And I use terms like marketing, again, not a term we've heard before, that are part of the discussions we're now having on the board in order for us to address this challenge. Lastly, let's talk about your first question, which was about the staff. We are constantly engaged with Reverend Sherry, talking about her own situation, her own workload, the staff. It's not easy. You all are not asking for less service as a congregation. And with the AV requirements of virtual church, as you pointed out, that's actually more. We are going to have to, in some cases, not do some things that we had planned on doing. Recently, we made the decision not to do a deep dive on measuring one of our ends because it would have required a minister to do double the work on a particular month at a time when Shannon, our membership coordinator, was actually out with an injury. I mean, we have to have that kind of sensitivity to our team, all of us, by the way, here in this virtual room. should reach out and be appreciative for Reverend Sherry and the team for what they do. And we also, as volunteers, should offer to find ways that we can help. The more we as a congregation take on some of the responsibilities that we do, pastoral work I mentioned earlier, the more we do for each other, the less there is for the people at the center to do when they're taking on more responsibility. Barbara, did I answer your question?
Yes, Gregory, thank you so much. And I just think it's important for us to think about that as you talked about reducing the benchmark of perfection, the technology piece that's so easy on our end, maybe not that easy, but easy enough, is so incredibly complicated when you are behind the camera trying to put it on.
Amen to that. By the way, I just want to say that Dave Friedman is one of my all-time favorite stand-up comedians, and I love his joke in the chat, which is, "Hey, Gregory, if I invite a person 20 years younger than me, they're still in the elder category, so that will actually help the demographics." Thanks, Dave, for that one.
Thank you, Gregory.
How are you then, Dave? How are you on mute?
Thanks, Gregory. I imagine if you share the goal of wanting our church to be more evangelical in the sense of reaching out and attracting people and sharing our good news with them, I wonder at what stage is that you've exhorted us with one task to go forth and bring a younger person in, but at some point I imagine an evangelical committee will be needed with a plan.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that we have to start
for growth and outreach.
I completely agree with you. I mean, part of this is invitational. By the way, most people come to church because someone asks to come to church. That turns out to be just true, and it's been true for decades. However, we do need to have a more orchestrated approach to that, and I think that that's something that the board is absolutely going to be looking at as we talk about what our expectations are for goals in the coming year for N number 1. And N1 is the one where we would measure things like the membership attendance and things like that. So stay tuned. I think you're going to see more systematic thinking there. Does that help?
Yes.
Dave, I think you have the last hand up. Go for it.
I was just going to give a couple of examples of the other things that you can do, want more involvement. Like when I first came treasurer many, many years ago, when we were just before the era of Church Mutual, and looking at insurance and how much insurance we were able to carry. I went over and talked to the treasurer of Third Presbyterian. I talked to the treasurer of the Episcopal Church here on Highland and Winton. And, we talked about what they did. The other thing is, and again, before we had the good governance, policy governance, finance, the reputation of the denomination was that Columbus, Ohio church had some advanced ideas there. So I set up a meeting. We drove halfway, 3 or 4 of us from our church and people in similar positions in the Columbus church. We met somewhere in between for 4 hours and a meal. And we just talked about what we did, and so there are things we can do in the position. It does require reaching out.
Yeah,
reaching out, but
it does, and it doesn't sound very pandemic-y, but I'm just going to say this. Imagine if we had a sign outside of our church right there on South Winton that said basically pancake breakfast. I don't know about you, but one of the best ways for us to attract more members is to have more people know about Ann's cooking. I think if we did that, okay, we would have over 1 billion served. That's what I think. The last 2 words I want to end with before I turn it back to Mary are thank you. You are the beating heart, the strong beating heart at the center of all that we do at First Unitarian. As board president, I am just so grateful for all that you do as a community. Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Gregory, we're delighted to have you and wonder if you would take one more question. I believe Grace has been wanting to ask a question and we didn't quite see it on our screen. Grace, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Grace. Good to see you.
Thank you. I just had a quick question that came to me as you were beginning talking, and that was, how many respondents were there to the congregational survey, and what was the age aggregate of respondents?
So let me answer your second question first. We're still doing the demographic analysis of what age and social and racial groups are represented in our survey. So we're not quite done with that piece of it, Grace, but I can tell you with great pride that we had a very high response rate. In fact, as high as it was 2 years ago. And we are probably 2x, 2 times the level of respondents that we see in other congregational surveys and things like this. So we're seeing a response rate where, basically more than 100 folks are responding out of an active sort of regular attendance of maybe online, and in total 250. So that's a very significant percentage. And as a total number of members, we're operating in the, John, do I have this right? Is it, what was the total number of respondents? Do you remember? Because I'm doing this from the top of my head.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat. It's 169, and then
Yeah, I
the
thought it
age
was north
is
of 150.
about 60 plus as a mean.
Okay. And that number, which is higher than the 159 I mentioned, so 169, is a really good statistically significant sample. The question is, how representative is it of our congregation as a whole? And I would say the 60 plus mean looks like it probably represents the age demographics of our church. Grace, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
With John's great help. With that, Mary, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Gregory. We're just delighted that you set aside the time and preparation for this morning. We had a nice crowd here today as usual, and appreciate your lending us your morning.